G'day, mate. Luke Ford here with Kevin Michael Grace. Topic 1, Brexit. Kevin, over to you. What's going on?
Well, Theresa May's attempt to play the suicide bomber and force her, well, it's not a no-deal Brexit, it's a no-exit Brexit. It's failed. Again, they keep voting and it keeps failing. Now, today is March 29th. That was the day, by law, that Britain was out. It was a no-deal Brexit. And Theresa May's plan, all along, it would seem, would be to blackmail the members of Parliament, particularly members of her own party, into voting for her no-exit Brexit by saying, it's going to be the end. It's going to be anarchy. It's going to be catastrophe. See, another thing that happened was her government made no plans for a no-deal Brexit. Again, an attempt to force Parliament to accept her no-exit Brexit. Now, she keeps being voted down, and in fact, control of Parliament was seized from her this week. This is absolutely extraordinary. It never happened before. She should have resigned weeks ago. She certainly should have resigned this week. But she's teasing this. She's teasing this notion that if you surrender British sovereignty, then I'll do the decent thing and resign. Again, she's the suicide bomber, prime minister. Now, as we speak, there are thousands of angry people. Downing Street, the police are there, and apparently the mood is getting ugly. These are people who are very angry that Theresa May has betrayed Brexit. Jon Snow, the venerable British newscaster, said, I'm not making this up, I've never seen so many white people together in my life. That's what he said to the protesters. See? You see, Titania McGrath said that the Brexit vote proved that 52% of Britons were white nationalists, and therefore democracy had failed in Britain. And here we have Jon Snow, the venerable Jon Snow, taking a similar position. Now, how is it that Britain is not out of the EU, given that that is the law? Well, Theresa May sent a letter to Donald Tusk of the European Union saying, well, we're not leaving. She just broke the law. She just ignored the law. For the law to be changed, it would have to be approved by the Commons. It would have to be approved by the Lords. It would have to be, signed into law. She didn't do that. She just sent a letter. So Britain has descended into lawlessness. And the Conservative Party has, well, I don't know, people keep talking about the destruction of the Conservative Party. It doesn't serve any purpose. Let's look at how this came about. David Cameron promised a referendum. Now, it wasn't supposed to happen. That was point one. Point two is that the Leave side wasn't supposed to win. David Cameron resigned after the Brexit vote, which was almost 3 years ago. And so the Conservatives held a leadership race, and Theresa May won. Theresa May was prominent on the side of the Remainers. This was a bad faith move by the Conservatives and demonstrates, at least to me, that they never had any intention of leaving the European Union. She rigged the system such that, the deal that she came up with essentially is, all the foreigners get to stay, all the EU foreigners get to stay, that Britain pays the EU 39 billion euros, and the European Union still has control over every aspect of British life. That's her idea of Brexit. So what's going to happen now? Well, apparently she's going to try again on Monday. And the feeling is that she's going to keep trying and keep threatening to blow up Britain if she doesn't get her way. I will stay here as long as it takes. Again, she should have been gone months ago, and she never should have been selected leader of the Conservative Party. But see, there are EU elections coming up, and they want to ram through this no exit Brexit before the EU elections. Because after the EU elections, well, then all bets are off, because it is anticipated that the anti-EU forces within the European Parliament will get a big boost at that poll. Now, I'm looking at a piece in the Daily Mail today. A snap general election would leave Parliament even more divided as both the Tories and Labour face losing seats. Latest analysis from polling expert Sir John Curtis reveals. He sees the Conservatives losing 10 seats and Labour losing 6 seats, which would result in a situation not much different than what exists now. I mean, his analysis, it doesn't give much weight to the possibility that UKIP or any protest parties might win any seats. Now, in a first-past-the-post system Britain has, it is difficult for new parties to break through. Typically what happens is they raise the percentage of support until they reach a breakthrough point, which is typically around 25 to 30% in any riding or constituency. But from what I've been hearing, and of course this is anecdotal, that Tory voters are absolutely furious with the Conservative Party, because you see people like Michael Gove and Oliver Letwin working behind the scenes to sabotage this, and very smugly, striding forward to the microphone and saying, well, you're just going to have to accept a no exit Brexit, or else what? Or else we'll just keep delaying it. We'll just delay and delay and delay and delay until we get what we want. Now, the Labour Party and quite a number of Conservatives, including leading ones, were talking about a people's referendum. Anyone who has used this phrase, people's referendum, deserves to be banished, not just from political life, but from social life forever. Because implicit in this phrase, the people's referendum, is that the referendum of 2016 was not a people's referendum. That, oh, well, they didn't know what they were voting for. Yeah, they knew what they were voting for, because the Remain side waved predictions of catastrophe in front of their face, not least of which merely voting for Brexit, let alone actually going through with it, would essentially, destroy the British economy at a stroke. Well, that hasn't happened, has it? Now, David, I believe I talked earlier on the stream about David Starkey, the well-known popular British historian, that he wrote a piece, again for the Mail, 800 years of democracy is unraveling before our very eyes. And 800 years is a reference to Magna Carta. And the essence of Magna Carta was that the nobles of Britain reclaimed powers, that King John was not allowed to be a dictator. Now we have a situation where, of course, where's the opposition? Where is the alternate sources of power to the Prime Minister? Again, and I keep saying this, Britain is a country, as all parliamentary countries do, that runs on a consensus, a series of rules which have been worked out over time. Two of those rules are that when the Prime Minister loses the consent of the country, he or she must go. When the Prime Minister loses the consent of not just a Prime Minister, but a party leader loses the consent of his party or her party, that person has to go. Now, Britain has not gone as far as Canada in this regard, but the old rule was that the caucus selects the leader. In Canada, the rule is that the leader selects the caucus, and increasingly in Britain, we have seen this. Of course, Theresa May, it's just a free form craziness here that the government has completely lost control of the parliamentary agenda, and I'm not even going to resign after that. What does this mean? Well, it means that the Tory party cannot be trusted. I don't think the Tory party can ever be trusted because, again, the Tory party decided to anoint a Remainer as their leader after the Brexit vote. And the Tory party, led by Theresa May, moved heaven and earth to attempt to force Parliament to accept a no-exit Brexit. Theresa May and the Tory party went so far as to simply ignore the law, to simply ignore it. Now, apparently lawlessness, Britain has a lawless regime, and I think that it's fair to call it a regime. It doesn't seem to bother Theresa May or the grandees of the Tory party or most of the British media. Now, let's see, Peter Hitchens, I have a lot of time for Peter Hitchens, but I think that his practical advice is worse than useless. He wrote in the Mail on Sunday, "I fear a British Donald Trump. I fear such a person will steal the slogans of the right and the merciless, dishonest propaganda methods of the left, as the US president has done. I fear that the rise of such a figure is the likely outcome of the catastrophe caused by David Cameron's folly in calling a referendum and everyone else's folly of walking into such an obvious trap. It barely matters now how the whole thing ends. The sense of disappointment and betrayal now abroad is here to stay. A lot of people are not going to be forgiven for their part in the EU referendum fiasco. Can anyone really thought that this great, greasy, congealed granny knot tied and retied and tightened for nearly 50 years could be undone by a single clean stroke? Did they think it could be undone without any effort on their part to change the British political, legal, cultural, and media elites, which had for 40 years supported our membership of the EU? They might as well have expected all the nation's rivers to reverse their courses or stood around waiting for figs to grow on thorns." Peter Hitchens' advice always comes down to don't bother, because nothing is ever going to change. Things are just going to get worse and worse and worse, and I'll get paid to deliver black pills to my audience every Sunday. As I say, worse than useless. David Cameron didn't say that the referendum was fake. The media didn't say that it was fake. Academia didn't say that it was fake. Business didn't say that it was fake. They all said, we must avert this disaster. And, well, the majority of the people in Britain decided that it was not, in fact, a disaster, that is to say, Brexit, and they voted for it narrowly, but that is the nature of such things. A parliamentary government with a one-seat majority can do all sorts of things. So the fact that it was 52 to 48 is really not relevant. This is a binary decision, in or out, and the British people chose out, despite the fact that the entire elite of the country was against them, and that those people who campaigned for leave were routinely traduced as racists, xenophobes, white nationalists, etc., etc. This, again, I'll just sum up by saying this. The leadership of Britain has no idea what it's done. Perhaps they would have done it anyway, even if they knew the likely consequences. But this is now a government without legitimacy. And a government without legitimacy is one that cannot surmount any significant challenges. And it is a government without legitimacy typically breeds a low trust society, a society in which the conventions, everything that is not nailed down, everything that is not law, gets thrown out the window. Because why should we do these things when we are led by a government of betrayers, when we have a lawless government? Why should we be any more loyal or lawful even than our government is?
So, are there any likely future prime ministers of the Tory party who you think could get a Brexit deal done?
Well, here's the thing. If Theresa May's no deal Brexit, no exit Brexit goes through, then it will be difficult to change. Because, oh my God, Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg, oh, they want to open this up again? It's been decided. Let it go. You see, the stare decisis only works in one direction, right? That we've seen this with the EU. We've seen it in votes in Ireland and Portugal, that they'll just keep you voting until you vote the right way after you've been threatened with dire consequences if you vote the wrong way again. That no parliament can bind a future parliament. That's another rule. Now, maybe they're decided that this rule is thrown out the window. And in fact, they actually have, because for bullshit populist reasons, and I consider myself a populist, but this is phony populism, that the governments of Britain and Canada, and I guess the provincial governments of Canada, have all adopted fixed election dates. No, that's not how the parliamentary system works. Not how it works. And more than once, the government has simply ignored its fixed election dates. No parliament can bind another parliament. These laws of fixed election dates are fatuous because government can call an election and there is going to be an election. It's as simple as that. Now, it just happened in Alberta that the election was called early. I mean, it was just, what, a month early, but it was called a month early nonetheless. See, the old system was that the opposition parties had to be on their toes because the government could call an election at any time. Obviously, if governments call elections without seeming to have a good reason, renewing the mandate, not good enough reason enough, then typically they're punished. And, few governments are going to call an election, say within 1 year of being elected. So the parties had to stay on their toes. Now, there's this phony peace where, no, you don't have to be on war footing until, date X, because the election, everyone knows when the election is going to be. But the governing party still retains the right, which cannot be taken away from it, to call an election when it sees fit, assuming that the governor general or the lieutenant governor gives permission. But there are, two or so examples, 2 or 3 examples in the history of parliamentary democracy where the governor general or lieutenant governor has said, no, you can't have an election. So they get an election. But what's happening with the parliamentary system is deeply sinister, because the prime minister of Britain or Canada is primus inter pares, first among equals, the first minister, in effect. The prime minister of Britain or the prime minister of Canada traditionally had much less power than, say, the president of the United States or the president of France. But there has been a convergence of the presidential and parliamentary systems. You give an example in Canada that it's not unusual, or it's typical for governments to win majorities with 35 to 40% of the vote. Well, we have a lot of parties in Canada that are represented in Parliament. And so the Prime Minister will say, I get to turn everything upside down because the people voted for me. Well, no. First off, the people only gave your party 35 to 40% of the votes. And furthermore, how many votes did you get? That number of votes you got in your riding. You weren't running as president. You were running for MP in your riding. You are the head of a caucus, a party leader. That's how you become prime minister. The result has been, at least in Canada, that the Prime Minister of Canada has powers far greater than the United States, powers that would make the supporters of Donald Trump swoon. If the Canadian system existed in the United States, the wall would have been built by now. Because here's how it works. That in Canada, the party leaders have to sign the nomination papers of people running in elections. What that means is that no one who stands against the party leader can be elected, ever. These people can be tossed out at any time during the nomination process or going up to an election or even after an election has been called. If we have this crisis in Canada where 2 female cabinet ministers resigned from Justin Trudeau's government, and it's expected that he's going to kick them out of the caucus. You see, so again, if the Canadian system existed in the United States, Donald Trump could pretty much do whatever he wanted to do. And even people like, your Mitt Romneys and the like, they would be terrified because Trump could simply kick them out of the party. They would still retain, Mitt Romney would still retain his seat, but he would be an independent. He would no longer be a Republican. That's not the way parliamentary systems are supposed to work. Again, let's look at Neville Chamberlain and Winston Churchill. After the Norwegian campaign turned into fiasco, 1940, Neville Chamberlain was blamed for this, even though it was Winston Churchill's fault. But he accepted the fact that he had lost the confidence of the Commons, and he resigned to be replaced by, guess who? Winston Churchill. That's the way that it works. I mean, Anthony Eden resigned after the fiasco of Suez. Margaret Thatcher resigned after the fiasco of the poll tax. That's the way the system is supposed to work. But there has never, in the history of Parliament, the British Parliament, been anything like this. And yet, suicide bomber Theresa May is still there. She's got her hand on the string saying, don't push me because I will bring this place to the ground.
Wow. So is Jacob Rees-Mogg a possibility for prime minister?
I don't know. He's seen as... Have you ever heard the man speak?
Yes.
He's exceedingly old-fashioned in his dress and in his locution. And he cuts rather a campy figure as well. And you think, well, Boris Johnson isn't taken seriously by a lot of people. Well, I think he's taken more seriously than Rees-Mogg is. His father was a pretty serious fellow, longtime editor of the Times. But Jacob Rees-Mogg decided to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech by reminding everyone that his father had denounced Enoch Powell as a racist, and he was so proud of his father because Enoch Powell was a racist, blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
So, that gives you an idea of the kind of man that Rees-Mogg is.